Hey, good morning, 1111 Club. This is Catherine Perry, the Big Vision Coach, and welcome and thank you so much for joining me today. I want to explain a little bit about what's going on at the time of this recording, and I may redo this intro yet again, but I just wanted to explain to folks that are part of the 1111 Club at the time that all of this is happening, which is the first 1111 Club. And we do calls 2 times a month on Wednesday. And the first call of the month, I got so inspired by the topic of time. And it's more than time management, but our power to use time at our, to our advantage, but also really what's the one thing that's stopping us from really applying all the tools to time management and goal setting, and how are we not thinking about time correctly? And so I did this really big broadcast that was about 2 hours long, and somehow I think there was some operator error because there was some other things happening at the time, and the whole recording did not get made. And I was really excited because it was my opportunity to chunk this down. And what we're talking about is time and mastering time. And the way that we're going to do this is I have broken this out into smaller teachings. Essentially, this is like an 8 pages of notes that I'm going to take you through. And when we get to the end of this, then I'm going to be taking you through commands. There'll also be some commands and physical exercises as we go along. But I wanted to break this teaching out into smaller, more digestible chunks so that you could go back to certain parts as you need them. Okay. And I wanted you to be able to think about a concept and apply it practically in your life. And that's what's up. Now, as I'm recording this right now, it is being recorded in the Facebook group. And that means that we are not part of the general discussion right now. But if you are joining and you have questions or comments, put them in the chat bar. And all you have to do first is to like the StreamYard application, and then I will be able to see you and answer questions. So who's ready to get in on this fascinating discussion about time? Now, anytime I almost feel like we're going to use and reuse and abuse this word many ways, but I'm just going to say that in your pursuit of success, in achieving more goals, in being a better version of yourself, the very first question that comes up is, how are you using your time? How to effectively use your time. We get the goal sheets and we align the priorities, and then we might focus on certain activities. And there's a lot of useful information about that. But the things that I want to talk about in time in this presentation really is not so much about that type of time. We're going to talk more about that. That's known as Chronos time, and it's very linear. It is action driven. There's time periods. There's measurements and everything else, and that is a very important function. Okay, you have to know how to do that. But the thing that stops many people from using their handy dandy calendar that's on their phone, that's on their computer, that's on their desktop, that's stopping them from using their day timer and action planner and goal setter is something a little deeper. And it's the thing that, even though we think that time runs everything, time is only a measurement of everything. What's actually running everything is our feelings, our emotions. Okay, now there's 2 different things. There's our deeper feelings, okay, and that's a lot of times it's undefined. We just have a vague sense of it, and we don't necessarily have the words or the pictures. This is a deeper primal sense of this visceral sense inside of our body, and and the only way it communicates with us is through reactions. Then we have our emotions that we know the names of, and we call it frustration and overwhelm, or being driven, or excitement, or flow, right? These are all emotional states. And they talk about, they're usually talked about in terms of how we're experiencing time, but it never really, that it has us at the effect of time, like how is time affecting us and how are we operating with time, but we never talk about how we affect time. Okay. And so this is some of the ideas that we're going to be discussing. So things come up, and what's actually driving us and keeping us from taking these actions. And that's kind of we could say the rudder, or that's, I'm just going to go ahead and go with that because I see this other like meter word is coming in, but it's really driving the whole thing. And it's our beliefs. Okay. And it's our beliefs about time, about our ability to use our time. How much time do we have? How much time are we worth? If you are in business for yourself, that is a big question. If first time you go get a job, how much do you want to get paid? Well, gosh, I don't know. What is the job worth? But we don't think in times of what is the job worth. We go, what am I worth? It comes down to that personal worth. So we are always bumping up against our personal value and time. And time is also a function of prosperity or abundant consciousness. And so just think about this. If you were raised in the factory model school, which most of us were, unless you were in the elite schools, you're really taught about appropriate times. It's time for this. It's time for this. You're on somebody's clock. In the presentation, what I started to express, and I have the link in here too, that is available in the group, the original presentation, that when we're born, we initially do not have any sense of time at all. And we don't even have our internal clock, which is the circadian clock, which is ruled by night and dark, okay, which is about waking and sleeping. And we have a sense of seasons, but essentially our circadian clock is a 24-hour cycle. When we're first born, we do not have that set yet. And that's why babies are awake all night. They don't know when to sleep or when to go to sleep. And eventually, after a few days of seeing the light and the dark cycles, then eventually the baby starts releasing the hormones in the morning of serotonin to wake it up and give it energy, and at night melatonin to go to sleep. And this is what determines our waking and sleeping, is the production of these two hormones, which is a function of the circadian clock. Now, what throws it off is, I don't know, artificial light, our exposure to blue light, schedules, and there's a lot of things that are not happening at sunrise, sunset anymore. We were, as creatures, we rose when the light broke, and we went to sleep when it went dark, pretty much. And we were on these 12-hour cycles of operating and sleeping, and then we were kind of got into the flow of the what was happening in the light of the day and what was happening in the cycle of the day. And we were very much more in tune with a natural cycle. Okay. And then the seasons help to further get us trained. But when we got out of our daily cycles, natural daily cycles and natural seasonal cycles, and more artificial cycles started taking over, to where it was a constant 24-hour clock. And then the nighttime was lit up all night long. And then there was stimulation 24/7. Then that throws us off, and we get more and more disconnected from our own rhythm. Now, when we're small as children, initially it's light, it's dark, we're hungry. We need to be changed. It's time to go back to sleep. But eventually we adopt our family system's rhythm, and then we're put into the school system. And the school system, that takes over, and then that trains us into certain activities and during the day. And in those activities, it's very regimented. Even playtime is a certain time. When you're smaller, there is rest time. And I have to say that the biggest mistake schools ever made was taking out a nap time, because everybody needed that time to rest, relax, and reflect. And that's something that got taken away from us. That is probably one of the most valuable things that we have. And so that was a big driver in me going to business for myself, so that I could build that into my own day, so that I could function best, so I could just be happy. But when we're trained in the factory model, and then we're trained to be workers, our time, we are taught that our time is only valuable because of what we're producing during that time. And then if we're lucky, along the way, we get to smell the roses. Along the way, we get to capture a little glimpse of beauty. Along the way, in between our work shifts, we can fall in love, we can create, we can dream, we can go play a little bit. But we lost control of time. And then when you're first trying to experience your own time, there's this feeling of guilt, or that you're doing something wrong, or you're being lazy. And so then that creates a lot of confusion and angst. So we've got to get control back to it. Now, the reason I say that it is that time is a function of prosperity consciousness is that you got to think about this. Who has time to play? Who has the time? And it's the wealthy. They have, the time. We don't think about the wealthy working long hours, even though if I were to think about Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, or even I think about Jeff Bezos. I mean, those guys seem like they are working all the time, and they've got lots of people working all the time for them. And that's one of the ways that they've bend time, but we're going to talk about that later. But they're doing work that's beneficial for them, that brings value to them, but they're fascinated and enchanted by it. They're doing the thing that they love, and it drives them, and they're working with time in an effective way. If you're in poverty consciousness, then you're having to work despite time. You're having to work around time, and you are at the effect of time. So we're going to talk about that. Okay. If you're at the cause, like the rich folks are, or we think about Jeff and Warren and Bill and Richard and all those others. But if you think about anybody in your life who is really prospering, they are at the cause of time. Okay. They are in the position of authority, and they're causing things to happen, and they're measuring results. And we're going to discuss that a little bit in this topic too. Okay. So let's get into this. Let's look at the different ways that we experience time. Now, this teaching is broken up into 7, I think actually there's 7 teachings, and then we have some homework, but we're going to be doing some extra little exercises along the way. All right, so let's go for this. Now, the way I have this organized, I have some notes here for you. And the notes have been emailed, but it's also available in the members area. And so this is where you can find this one handout that covers all of the recordings that I'm doing today. So number 1, that we really must get, that time is perception. It is not a concrete thing that is out there that we have to try to fit things in and pull things out of. That it's 100% perception. And in the special theory of relativity, Einstein determined that time's relative. In other words, the rate of time passes depends on your frame of reference. Now, one of the things that he said about relativity, and I'm paraphrasing, is, hey, if something seems like, like an hour, that's a long time to kiss a girl, but it's it's not a very long time to be kissing a girl, but it's a very long time to be doing unpleasant work, right? It's just all relative, that same hour. And whether or not it passes fast or slow depends on our emotional perception of it. Is it valuable? Is it a waste of time? We think about people standing in line and how people get very frustrated and angry and they go, oh, this is a waste of time. And they argue, and their unhappiness increases their perception of the time that they're waiting. Whereas the person who's standing there reading, they're in the same line and they might be reading a book, or there's that nice lady that's always knitting or crocheting. They're just wherever they are, they're taking advantage of that time, and they're happy to have a few minutes to read or to knit. I love to think and make notes. I love people watching, and so when I'm in line, I just take that time as it's very enjoyable, unless I feel like I've got other things to do. Okay. But usually if I can just get my head around the fact that it's going to take as long as it's going to take, and whatever time it takes, I'm going to make the best use of, then personally, I'm fine. Okay. So we can also say, and the way that he thinks about this, and I want to read this because it's important, just as observers in two different frames of reference don't always agree on how to describe the motion of a bouncing ball, they don't always agree on an event that happened or how long it took. Now, what he's talking about here is the same thing that we deal with memory. Okay, if you were to tell a story about an event that happened, let's say with your family, everybody's gone through this, you recount a family story about something that happened at a certain time, you have a crystal clear memory of it. And in fact, it's so clear, you've told the story many, many times, and you felt pretty awake and aware of it, and you've had enough time to think about it that you might even dissected it and kind of broke out and replayed the whole scene from start to finish. And so you think you pretty well know everything about it. And then you tell someone else and they go, no, that didn't happen. Like, yeah, this happened because I know it happened because it happened at the same time as, and then we relate it to this other significant time period in our life. It could be even an agreed upon reality. It's like, yeah, I know that happened at that Christmas because that's the Christmas that we were living on 10th Street. Or I know that happened because that was the Christmas where Dad went to the hospital afterwards. There's usually an emotional connection there. Okay. So our emotional memory is tied to our perception of a time, which then connects to our logical memory. Okay. So two different people, though, they go, no, that didn't happen because that was the year that I was in college, and that was back in 96. So if it was 96, I was living in Tampa. And if I was living in Tampa, that means, this and this happened. And I know it didn't happen because I was at that dinner, and I didn't get to come to the dinner in 96 because of being in Tampa, but I was at the dinner in 97. Right. And then here comes the argument. We've already heard all of this, right? So what did both people recount? Here's the dinner. Here's the memory. They go, yeah, here's the memory. But then they both have a different recounting and emotional, locational, mental frame of reference that supports their memory. I know. So that's what they're talking about when it's all relative. Okay. Did the dinner happen? Yes. Did the event happen? Yes. Is it more significant to one than the other? Yes. But both people having the same memory put it in different places in time. Isn't that interesting? A second in one frame reference may seem longer compared to a second in another frame reference. So, kind of paraphrasing a paraphrase of Einstein. Hey, 1 second of kissing versus 1 second of getting your hand, smashed in a door. Very different amounts of time. Okay. So this is what we're talking about. We need to understand that how we are experiencing time, it is directly related to our emotions, our personal sense of place. It's aligned to our values, and it's aligned to our perception and how we see the world in a greater way. And this is why so many times just a regular day timer or planner really doesn't work, because if you're living in overwhelm already, if you don't feel like you have enough time and there's too many things jammed into your time, trying to overlay one more system to try to control all of that feels more overwhelming. It doesn't simplify it. The way that you start getting control of your time is in getting control of your thoughts and your emotions, and giving yourself permission to experience time in different ways. This is a very valuable skill, and learning how to move yourself front, back, up, down, and around time to get new information. Now, we know how to do that in memory, but we very often do not know how to do that in the future. People who are creative and visionary types are fantastic at this. But the challenge is that people who are very creative and they're visionary and they can create all these great pie in the sky things do not know how to make it time bound. So it just remains a fantasy. Unless you make it real by putting it on the calendar and creating the actionable steps, it's never going to get into your own timeline. And this is what throws a lot of people off. They don't understand why they can't get to their dreams, is because they did not bind their vision to time. And then by binding it to time in their own timeline, then that starts to make it a reality. It's kind of like it creates these 2 points of agreement that start to make it more real. But then what stops people is their other belief about not enough time. Oh my gosh, there's too much to do. It's too big. This year personally, I could tell you I'm 62. Oh my gosh, I'm 62. How much do I really have time to do all the stuff that I want to do, right? And my idea of how fast the past 60 something years have gone versus how fast I think the next 5 or 10 could go. Woo! And so next thing you know, it's almost like being in a train station and the 2 trains are going in opposite directions, and you're in the middle trying to figure out which train to catch, but they're both going very quickly, right? And so you have to know how to slow down and speed up your perception of time. And when we talk about time bending later, we're going to be doing this later in the month. We're not going to be doing this lesson, but we're going to be talking about ways to bend time. But as you start getting control of your emotions, your perception of time, you learn how to think about time and understand, as we're going to be exploring today, how time is a function of consciousness. Then you're going to be able to accomplish a lot more in a lot less time. It's going to be so fun. Okay, so let's get back to this. So when we know this, we know that when we think about doing anything, we think about in terms of time. In business, it's our day-to-day life, and it's usually on productivity. So effective time management is crucial. We have to know how to do this. But if we make the time more important than what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and we focus only on the time, what happens is we start feeling the pressure, there's anxiety, there's the tension, and then we're trying to push. That's where that pushing that rock up the hill feeling starts coming from, because we aren't working with the time. Okay. And when we learn to work with time, what happens is, amazingly, we start being able to do things a lot faster. So Asara, my teacher, business partner for a lot of years, we might know we'd have 2 or 3 weeks to work on something, but we found that what worked best for us, and we just wound up working on the deadlines. And so we said, we knew that as we would go into the super focused time, we could get more done in a shorter amount of time. But the breakthrough that happened for both of us when we said, oh my gosh, we don't have to put that deadline right up to the edge of hours before we're delivering our content. Let's put that deadline 2 weeks ahead. let's create this deadline. We did not have that emotional connection. We didn't put that emotional consequence in. Okay. And it was a breakthrough moment. And in doing that, our creativity in the One Command Global Corporation exploded. Our ability to create content, our ability to market, our ability to reach out to more people, it exploded when we realized that we had that ability to move these deadlines around and act as if everything depended on it getting done at midnight that day, or it was all over with. We learned to put those in place. Okay. And we wound up getting tons done, tons accomplished. Okay. So what am I talking about when I say that how we perceive time is a function of different levels of consciousness? Okay. So, well, when we're thinking about different levels of consciousness, I want to just kind of remind people that in the One Command teaching, we talk about the different brain waves. And when we're in our ordinary thinking, we're in our beta brainwave, and there's a particular, and we're operating a particular frequency. Okay. And right now, in our ordinary thinking, our beta brainwave, we can be consciously aware of only about 7 to 9 things at any given moment, any one particular moment. And that could be like, well, you could be aware of it consciously, of something that you're seeing, you're tasting, you're hearing. You could be aware of the atmosphere, you could, and taking in that information. Okay. Only 7 to 9 things. That's an incredibly low number when you can consider that at any given moment, there's billions of bits of information to be processed. And there's so many ways to try to understand it and filter it. How could we possibly determine which 7 to 9 bits are relative to what is most important to us at any given moment? Well, a lot of that is predetermined by decisions we made in the past. And that's why setting up your own personal operating system and deciding in advance what is important to you and what you're looking for is really important. But a lot of that has already been set in even before you were really before the age of 7 or 9. And that was set in by some decisions and choices and things that happened to you before you were too young to understand them. But along the way, we will have something happen, and then we'll make this decision. It brings us to a new decision point, and we'll go, you know what, that's it. From now on, I won't ever do this or this or this, or I'm not going to have that, or I guess it's not for me, right? Keep that money out of here. Keep that job opportunity out of here. Keep all that out of here. And next thing you know, we start deleting and distorting, and we become literally blind to other things that, even though we may want it, our beta brain, our beautiful beta brain, has already said, nope, it's not available. So when we are in the moment, when we're in, like, hey, I was doing it, right? Have you ever had this happen? Something happened, you got to make a decision, and you do it. And then there was the first thing, some helpful soul who was not there with you, who was not there dealing with it at all, said, why didn't you just do this instead? Why didn't you just say these words? Why didn't you just take this action? Why did you do that when you could have equally had the choice to not do it, right? And you go, at the moment, that wasn't available to me. You weren't there. Whoever had that argument, you weren't there. If you had been there, you would have seen everything I dealt with. But if you had been inside my head and my body, you would have noticed all the emotions I was dealing with too, right? And that's because we ran up against our beta thinking, and we were blind to or unable to access other resources in the moment. Okay. That's what happened. That's being in that beta brain. Now, the next level We could think about alpha, and this is when we're more in that relaxed state. We might be visioning or dreaming or thinking about stuff, imagining, and we can kind of get into this flow state where we could just kind of see, like, yeah, we're writing out our schedule for the week, and we're projecting into the future. And when we're doing that, we're in that alpha state. We're kind of in this bigger frame of reference, and we have more resources available to us. And then we're like, I want to make sure that I have time to go to that networking meeting because I want to be sure and meet this person and this person. And then you're imagining meeting the person at the networking meeting, and then you start imagining and thinking about the things that you would need. And then you imagine that conversation, right? And then you go, well, what needs to happen? And then you start adding things to your schedule. And there's this conversation that you're having with yourself about your future and your past and your present all at once. It's kind of cool, but it's still very linear. Okay. It's still based on how you know yourself, your beliefs about your capabilities, your personal value, and your own importance, right? You're going to be thinking about that. It's like, well, yeah, I would love to meet that person, but why should they talk to me? And then you get in this whole other thing. So alpha can be very valuable, but also, unless you learn how to use your alpha brainwave, your power of imagination for good, if you start fantasizing for positive outcomes rather than saying, okay, there's some positive outcomes that could happen that I don't want, and how could I plan for those? Very often people don't do that extra step of, okay, yeah, this bad thing could happen. If that happens, then what's next? They're not using their imagination. How will I deal with that? What are some things I could do to manage that? They start spiraling backwards into a negative, fearful way. And this has to do, again, with our emotions and some beliefs that were made in advance. Okay. So then if we want to go into a greater sphere of influence, as we call it, and go into a different perception of time, then we're going to go into theta. And now when we're theta, we're disconnected from our emotions. We're in this all that is, and it's all possible. And then we're in this powerful space of being the observer of our reality. And by changing our thoughts, what we observe starts shifting. When we start changing what we're observing, then what happens, our emotions start aligning to it as if it were already so. When we do that, the old emotions, the old emotional connections, the old habits, systems, and programs start naturally releasing and unwinding to allow that new idea to arrive. And this is why we work with the one command process. This is why we turn that together, so that we are transcending ordinary time. We're going into the expanded view of time and into the bigger picture, higher above it all, where we could be looking down, seeing the big picture. But we can go into time at any point. We also have the ability to visit parallel universes. And science is saying, yeah, there's such a thing as parallel universes that exist. And so when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about, right now there's the way you know yourself, your current reality, your life, and all the possibilities and all the decisions that got you from, where you were to where you are now. And now you got to think about all the possibilities and decisions that you have to make to get to where you want to be next, right? We always think about that, but we're always thinking about it in terms of the past version of ourselves, not the version of ourselves that we wish to become. Okay. And allowing that greater version of ourselves to pull ourselves forward in time. Now, if you notice, I'm talking about time as moving forward, and I'm dropping hints about something called a timeline. Pay attention, because there's going to be more about this coming. Okay. But we really definitely have this sense of a lot of people feel their past is behind them and their future is in front of them. So when we're in theta, we have the ability to go into not only looking at our own time and moving forward in the future, and we have the ability to look at different outcomes. And when I think about parallel universe, I think about, hey, there's a version of me that exists that got married at 21 and stayed married all these years. Did not happen in this timeline that I'm living with you now. There's a version of me that said yes to this opportunity. There's a version of me that said no to that thing I knew that I didn't really want to do, right? And there's all these aspects of myself, and there's all the cast of characters and all these other realities, potential and potential and potential. There's all this potential around you occurring all at the same time. But we can only be aware of it at these different levels of consciousness. And when we're in theta, we have a greater awareness of it. And as we move into these different potentials through our mind, through our imagination and our visioning, then we are having an effect on time. Okay. And our time in theta in the sessions goes very quickly. That's why when we do the theta work, it is 1 hour of working in theta is like 10 years of therapy. It really is. People have told me time and time again, it's like I've worked and worked and worked on that, and I could not get to the key on that. And the answer is always time bound. Okay. Now, when we go into this greater state of being, we go into a more unaware state, but there's a lot of power that is that delta brainwave. It's a big, long, wide, slow, and that takes us across all, through, I would say, not through necessarily parallel universes, though it does, but we could actually go through levels of consciousness like we think about in ages, and we could think about more of a vertical. So there's a teaching in Theta Healing by Vianna Stibel that I really love how she thinks about this, and this relates to going into that greater delta. And she thinks about planes of existence, which is a little different than parallel universes. Inside of each universe, there's a plane of existence, and the lowest would be the rocks and the minerals. Okay. And each one has a component that relates to the cells in the body. So that's rocks and minerals, right? Our bones. Then the next level would be, and coming in the second would be like plants. Okay. And then how all of the plant kingdom works together. And then we bring up that next level. And then there's, in this next plane of existence, this brings in our, human relationships, the actions that we're taking. There's animals at this level, right? Our animal knowing. And then coming in up into this next plane of existence that's usually related to the heart. But then this has to do with ancestors, right? And then the next plane of existence is the laws. And then the next plane of existence is the all that is. And I love the way that she broke that down and helping to clear beliefs at different levels. And so each one has its own time frame. Okay. So when we're in Delta, we have the ability to go into these different planes of existence. And then we're in Gamma, we're in all of them at once. We're pulling all the information together from all these realms of every level of existence and consciousness, and we have the ability to pull and crystallize it and bring it into any given moment at any time. These are different levels of consciousness. Okay, that's what we're talking about. All right, so our perception of that is related to time. We have probably heard about what we focus on expands. As we give more time and attention, we have the ability to go into a deeper meaning. Like if you just started focusing on an apple and meditating on an apple, then you could think about your image of an apple, the memory of a taste of an apple, and how the texture of the fruit is in your mouth. Think about, hey, what is your concept of When you even think about an apple, does it have a stem or not? Is it hanging on a tree? Then you think about the seed of the apple and all the potential. And if you just start focusing on that apple and taking yourself through the different times of the cycle of the apple and the different experiences of the apple and all the potential inside of an apple seed, that's what I'm talking about. So what we focus on expands, but this is also kind of tying back to the levels of consciousness, right? And then how we experience time is an extension of our own self-perception. Now, this is very important because when we talked about our, time and being trained in the factory model and being our perception of the rich, how we experience time is an extension of our self-perception. That's why if we don't feel like we have enough time, it's actually an extension of our belief about not being enough. Ourselves. Within us, there's something that believes that we are not enough. And if we aren't getting enough good things done, then we must not be good enough. Okay. And so think about how, when you're talking about your experience of time, you're really talking about yourself and how you view yourself. Okay. Now, before you can master time, you've really got to understand more about time. And this is why we're giving time and attention to this. So we need to understand that time is a fourth dimension. And we're going to be doing a thought experiment in the next video. But it is, at the simplest, it is a measurement of speed and distance. But what creates time is, and this is fascinating, it is gravity and is the weight of an object. Okay, so if you can imagine time as a sheet, okay, and there are 4 people holding the corners of a sheet, okay, that could represent time. But what creates gravity is weight, okay? And gravity is the relation between weight and time, and that's what creates a pull. It's fascinating. And so the heavier the object, the greater the pull of gravity becomes, right? So if we were holding a sheet and there was a big heavy ball in the middle, we'd be like, okay, I can hold on. But suddenly that would take out an object that was twice as large, twice as heavy, or it could even be the same size, but just denser and heavier. We'd have a hard time. And what happened is that time would start collapsing in, and then there would be gravity, right? So that's why some places have greater gravity and lesser gravity. Well, it's the same time. Like if we were to think about just time as, gravity as a metaphor for perception, something that we personally give more weight to is going to take more time. Time is going to be naturally given and pulled to the thing that we are giving weight of importance to. Okay, so if we don't really align to what's truly important to us, and we don't feel like we have the right to give that time and attention, if we don't think we have the ability to manage that time and attention, what are we going to do? We're going to ignore it. We're going to drop the sheet. We're going to run away. And everything's going to we're going to feel like it's flying around us. So we really need to understand ourselves and what matters to us. We need to understand our value system. And what is the most important thing that you want to get out of any experience that you're doing, right? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why does it matter? How does it align to the things that you want to achieve in your life? And when you really learn to start being present, fully present in each moment, this is going to start expanding time. Personally, I've really struggled in my life because I was a single mom and I was working these 2 or 3 jobs. And then when I went into business for myself, working really became the way of life. And then I got into survival mode, and then I became a workaholic. And there's this kind of feeling in my family that I like work better than my family because I never could quite turn my mind off. I didn't know how to give myself permission to turn it off and to really be present in the moment. And there's still some unwinding on that with me and my family. And it's like, no, I don't like work better than you. I don't like work better than my family, but I need to learn how to be more present to my family when I'm with my family. Once I started committing to doing that, my time started expanding, my satisfaction, and then it was easier to balance back to work. Okay, so that's why we've got to be able to take a look at these things. Now, we have heard about the observer effect, and it comes back to this. The observer effect is the disturbance of an observed system by the act of observation. And a really good place to look at this I have in the handout is the link to the slit experiment that discusses that. I want to ask you to watch the video on this, but basically, as they were doing this experiment, they had their expectation of what would happen in doing this light experiment. Would they see particles or would they see waves? And based on their expectations, the particles showed up when they expected to see particles, and the waves showed up when they started when they expected to see the waves. It was fascinating. So I have a great YouTube video on that here. And then finally, I want to end this in talking about this one thing: cause versus effect. And I'm just going to go ahead and just come right to this. But in the handout here, you see that I have this little graph that says C greater than E. Cause is greater than effect. When we are the cause, and then this is a secret of people who are successful entrepreneurs and live in abundance. They have made the decision to be the cause of what they want to happen. Just like when Asara and I realized, wow, we do our best work with a deadline, and we never really, it wasn't until we both kind of looked at each other and said, we're the ones in authority. We're the ones setting up our calendar. And what would be better for our mental health is to move the deadline back, determine a new deadline so that we're not frazzled when we're getting on an airplane and frazzled when we get off and going and teaching the seminars, so that we could be in the way that we wanted to. So we had to say, to get that result of having more control of our time, what are we going to do? We put ourselves at cause. We decided to cause. So then once you say, this is what I want to create, this is the outcome I want to have, then when you're doing that, that gets results. When you get results, you're able to measure them. Then when you're deciding to do that, that's when you start being able to put things on your calendar, getting charge of your calendar. When you're the cause, then you get results. Okay. But if you're always at the effect of time, which is what we have been trained to do, this is the time, these are the hours you have to work, there's only so many days, then you're powerless. And what happens is we start giving ourselves reasons for why things happen, why they didn't happen. And unless, depending on our personality, that can quickly turn into blame. So what we're going to be focusing on is cause is greater than effect. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end today in this portion of the video, and then I will be seeing you very soon as we go into a beautiful thought experiment.